We as men, we do not talk. We embrace suffering and silence as a code of honor. And as a result, we emotionally implode, or like what I call emotional incarceration. It's a self-imposed imprisonment where we willingly shut our hearts off from the world.
Welcome to the Crucible Project Podcast. The Crucible Project is a nonprofit organization committed to creating a world of men and women who live with integrity, grace, and courage, helping them to fulfill their God-given purpose. This podcast will discuss important and sometimes difficult topics while delivering practical life applications with men and women who are currently practicing this work. We are igniting Christ-like change in men and women through experiences of radical honesty and grace.
Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to the Crucible Podcast. My name is Andy Spell, and I will be the interviewer and host today on our podcast. Folks out there in listening land, I am excited to have Jason Wilson with me today. Jason Wilson is an author. He's written the books Cry Like a Man and Battle Cry. He is known for the Cave of Adullam. He has been on a video that went viral that we'll talk about in a little bit. He's also a coach. He's a mentor. He's a motivator. Man, Jason's kind of a man of all things. It's really good, Jason, to have you with us today.
Hey, Andy, how you doing, man? Long time. We've been talking about this maybe for over a year, maybe.
It's close.
So I'm glad we were able to finally connect, man.
So if you would please, as we start, the way I got introduced to you before I knew I was going to be interviewing you, because I was one of those who saw the viral video. It was a viral video that the other day I went and watched it yesterday. Again, it has gotten up to 3.2 million views, which blows me away that many people have watched it. And it's titled, if you go to YouTube, folks, it's titled Breaking Through Emotional Barriers. And it's you working with a young man. Would you please just take a second? That's how I got introduced to you. And I remember being in tears when I watched it. Would you kind of explain to our listening audience what that video was about?
You know what's interesting, Andy? That video now, like on YouTube, I think it's over 3. But worldwide, we had an evaluation done in-house, and it has over like 350 million views if you include social media as well.
Wow. Yeah.
What happened was interesting. Initially, Andy, we weren't recording tests and posting them like that. I had only set up the camera for his father, who was a friend of mine, so they would have a memory of his test, my student's test. And if you look, it was an expensive camera. I hadn't really focused the camera. I just sat it up just to get the moment for him. And what had happened was that Bruce, at the time, was taking his initiation test into the Cave of Adullam. And one of the qualifications, you have to break this board with both sides, your right and your left hand. And he had broken the board several times a week prior practicing. But what he faced that day of the test that he didn't deal with prior in practice was a fear of failure. And that was his barrier. That's why I titled it Breaking Through Emotional Barriers. It wasn't that, he wasn't capable enough with the skills to break through the board. He's done it several times. It was just in that moment, he couldn't meet that demand. And so it was nothing new in the academy. Many of the boys were used to being vulnerable. And when he started crying, I dropped to one knee to make sure he knew he was the focus of my attention and said, hey, man, it's okay. We cry as men. And I ended up just coaching him through his emotions. And as a result of helping him be able to process what he was feeling, he was able to break the board and pass the test. So it resonated with men worldwide. And I didn't know really when I got a call from the office, actually my wife, she was like, Jason, is there some type of video out? Because we keep getting calls. We can't work today. I'm like, what do you mean you can't work today? The phone was ringing nonstop. So in 2016, for a video to get 1.8 million views was a big thing. Do you know men from all over the world were calling, speaking to our female staff, basically sharing their hearts, some even crying, saying, I wish my coach would have been like that, or my father, etc.
Yeah.
And that's when I knew, I'm like, wait a minute, because prior I thought it was just a black issue that majority of us as men have to repress our emotions and always feel that we need to be strong, wear this facade that nothing shakes us. But after that video and then writing my book, Cry Like a Man, I realized it wasn't an ethnicity thing, but a male issue that
Yeah.
all of us as men deal with. So that was the beauty in that video going viral. Not only was able to help boys break free, but men break free from emotional incarceration.
And I think what was so lovely about it was, as I watched it, Jason, you didn't shame the young man. You didn't tell him to suck it up, don't cry. You even said, "I cry."
Absolutely.
And you asked him what's going wrong. And I remember him saying, "I can hit it with the right hand, but not as hard with the left hand." And he's in tears and just in that gentleness. And then he breaks the board.
Mhm.
It was just beautiful. And I think it
Yeah.
showed the beauty of that men do have tears. And
Mhm.
isn't it interesting that that one video summed up how many men have felt like they wanted to cry but they couldn't, and you being a strong man and a coach and a man with this young man at a very vulnerable spot
Mhm.
lifted him up, and he was actually able to do the very thing that he was afraid of.
You know what's that funny, man? We say it in passing like it's no big thing, but you literally say what many men say. Like we, as men, we have tears. I'm like, yeah, God gave us tear ducts as well. And so,
Right.
when I studied what was really an epiphany for me or confirmed my calling was that Dr. William Frey, he's a biochemist, and he discovered that tears, when emotionally induced, not only contain water but also stress hormones that it get excreted from our bodies when we cry. And so, when you tell a boy, big boys don't cry, or no pain, no gain, you've conditioned him to repress his humanity, his God-given right to shed stress, cry out to him, and become reset again. And ironically, if you go in any house of worship, typically the women are praising the Most High more than we do, because we're not used to expressing a surrendering spirit, or one where we're broken, crying out, falling, weeping, crying. To us, that's weak. And as I said in my book, Battle Cry, we often quote, we can do all things through Christ who strengthens us. But unfortunately, he can't do all things through us if we're only exuding masculine attributes. He can only call upon us when he needs a war to be won, or for us to defend someone, or to provide. He created us to be comprehensive men. And that video and the other ones, men were like, I'm tired of living in this box. And we know something is wrong, brother, because look at, we die by suicide almost 4 times as likely as women.
Man, I saw that. I saw that statistic. Jason, that blew me away. And why do you think that is?
Well, it's not just me, it's, psychotherapists believe because we as men, we do not talk. We embrace suffering in silence as a code of honor. And as a result, we emotionally implode, or like what I call emotional incarceration. It's a self-imposed imprisonment where we willingly shut our hearts off from the world. And this world is in dire need of comprehensive men who, of course, who are courageous and strong, but also compassionate, sensitive, and nurturing.
Right.
And of course, our women have superior qualities in that department as far as being a nurturer, because God chose her to bring life through. So I hope she's better than we are with being a nurturer. But however, this world is in dire need of a man's nurturing love. And it's
Right.
different, but it's needed. And because we feel that, it's a sign of weakness, unfortunately, society is missing out, so.
Yeah, and how beautiful is it when a man does learn to nurture? How
Mm,
beautiful is it when a man can bring strength and nurture into a world that's needed?
yeah, it's what's the saying? It's better to be a warrior in a garden than a gardener in a war.
Yeah.
And so you want to
Yes.
have both, you know what I mean? But you don't want to like get rid of the masculine attributes that God needs for us to have in order to fight certain injustices or to deal with bullying per se.
Yeah.
However, we need to have access to the other emotions that allow us to connect even with our children on a better level. I mean, if there's no empathy or compassion, or we're not used to tapping into those areas in our lives, we're unable to meet the moment when our son is bullied and he don't need the tough talk. He needs for us to be compassionate so that our son can receive the encouragement and say, hey man, I'm gonna show you how to protect yourself or how to stand up for yourself. But you first have to start at ground zero to help him first heal and release the trauma he's experienced so that all that you're trying to plant in him will be able to grow and it's not on unfertile ground.
Right. And I think, again, what I've read is so many men who commit suicide, it's because they never realized that they could take a burden and share
Mhm.
with others. And so years and years and years of just carrying this stuff finally come to a breaking point and they don't know where to turn. And so they turn to the only way out that they know of, which they feel like is heroic, but it's
Mhm.
really not.
Yeah, it's not. It's unfortunate that what's interesting, though, I found out, Andy, is that women make more attempts at suicide. Men were just more successful.
Uh,
So we want to make sure we die,
mm,
and we take more lethal means of making that happen. I often tell men who reach out to me, and they sit with it for a while. I say, "Do you think you were born to kill yourself?" And they sit with that for a long time. And they said, well, I never pondered that. So then we work our way backwards. Like, okay, how did we get here?
yeah.
I was just with a financial advisor and we were talking about the same topic. And I was saying, man, how many men you've heard the stories over and over, Andy, where they're successful bankers, but something happens to the company and they lose their job. They go home and not only kill themselves, but kill their entire family.
Right.
With his resume, he can get a job anywhere. But because we as men identify ourselves by only what we do and our accomplishments, when we're shaking in that area, when that is our foundation, we feel that we're worthless now.
Right.
I had to learn that I was more than what I do for a living. It's why I was created to live and why God needed to use me on this planet. And so it doesn't matter how much money I make, how many books I sell, how many boys I save, my purpose for existence, it all lies in Christ. So once I have that as my foundation, everything else can build upon it. So if everything shakes, it's like a house being blown over by, just say, a hurricane. If the foundation is still there, you can rebuild. If my foundation is set in Christ, I can rebuild. But if it's set in what I feel my worth is and it's not, I'm done. I can't rebuild off of that. And so many of us as men, I mean, even good brothers, my brothers in the crucible, it's just like we get caught up in serving so much that it's like you can't rest. And I'm like, well, wait a minute, where is that coming from? And for me personally, Andy, it came from my father wound, never being good enough. So when I got affirmation from being a great servant, I caught myself doing it from that woundedness instead of being healed. And so that's the biggest issue. So here it is. First thing, we feel that crying is a weakness, and it's not. It's actually God's way of helping us release the stress hormones. That's why we feel better when we cry. And then two, we feel it's just us. We're
Mm,
alone in
yeah.
this. And that's why when you gather men together, like especially at Crucible weekends, men say, wait a minute, it's not just me. I'm not alone in this. Then you start to find strength in like, wait a minute, I can win because this brother just did. And
Right.
and truthfully, I don't believe men want to be alone. It's just after trying to connect for so long and then you have failed relationships or embarrassment with, trying to date a woman and for marriage and it just doesn't work. You give up. And so, unfortunately, men find themselves in a cell with a door that's open, but we refuse to get
Yeah.
out because we're scared to take that journey again.
Right. And the whole idea is that failure, and I know you know this, and I'm sure you teach it to your young men and everyone you talk to, even women. Failure's not the end. Failure is not a bad thing. I mean, it's great. I mean, it's so good to go and try things and you fail and you learn and you get back up. But for some reason, we feel like there's such shame and so much pressure put on. If I fail, somehow it's made me less than.
Yeah, it's interesting. We teach in our academy that mistakes are our greatest teacher, but the only worst bad mistake is the one you didn't learn from.
Right.
And so I remember, I mean, one day we were training and the kids were so nervous and it was our teenagers. And I'm like, hold on, I stopped class and I said, can you make a mistake in practice? And they looked at me, they were like, of course. I said, no, if that's the case, it wouldn't be practice. That's what it's for.
Right.
Now, you can make a mistake in the game, you know,
Yeah.
but in practice, you should be free trying to practice and perfect whatever it is you're working on. So many of us in life, we have to understand we've allowed ourselves to be taught, allowed the world to define what a man is, even marriage. And so we think there's this pinnacle, like this level you reach as a man. But once you believe that, you've put a cap on your evolution as a man. And so I tell men there is no point of arrival in manhood. It's only constant evolving. I've never been a grandfather, so I have to learn that again. Do you understand? And so I've never been a father-in-law. I can go down the line, but if I feel that I've reached this level, and then now when face another challenge that is difficult, I said, "Man, I'm not a man. Something's wrong." Or
Right.
if you're feeling tender, you feel like, wait a minute, that's not a masculine emotion. I must not really be a man. And so we have to learn how to understand that it's about being human, being able to tap into all the emotions that God created for every human to feel. And the one analogy I love using is the box of crayons. So you have one box of 8, then you have one box of 64. And when I have this presentation in front of me, and I have it on my PowerPoint, I say the 8 box is typically the range of emotions that we allow ourselves to express. And I would say typically it's about 3 of those crayons: anger, depression, and shame,
Mm.
and maybe anxiety. We had those 4 crayons. But here it is, women are able to tap into all 64 of these emotions that all humans should express and feel. And then we wonder why, as men, we have a difficult time communicating with our women, because here it is, she's speaking in violet, and all we have is purple.
Yeah.
You see,
Yeah. Yeah.
and so that's the issue. So when men learn that it's okay I mean, anger is a surface emotion. Okay, it's one we've learned to embrace and express with everything. But I've learned, and I teach men to let's dive deeper. So instead of it going to the surface, I want you to express the deeper emotion. Like it may be fear, it
Hmm.
may be a shame or trauma, unresolved trauma, and so or sadness. I don't want to lose you. Like a lot of men express anger when, say, they get in an argument with their wife or the woman in their life, and it's really fear of losing them.
Yeah.
And so I've learned to express, with my wife when our marriage was very unstable. I learned to say, I can't live without you. That vulnerability allowed her to drop her guard, and I could express really what I was feeling without, I guess, fearing that she would impassively dismiss my vulnerability.
Right.
And that's true power when a man can be both, strong and sensitive. I mean, that's a very powerful man then.
Absolutely. And we're never going to arrive, and we're never going to do. We are human. I think you talked about it's about a humanity. I'm going to make mistakes during a day, but that doesn't mean that I'm a bad person. I loved watching the Super Bowl, and it came back to me again and again and again. Here's Brock Purdy. Here's Mahomes. They're playing fantastic games. And Mahomes was the MVP, and he won the Super Bowl, and he threw an interception. And they made bad plays and they were behind. I mean, he did not play a perfect game. He made mistakes within his game, but he did not let those mistakes take him out of the game. And I think so many times we can see our failures and our mistakes, and for some reason we allow those to take us out of the game. And I that's part of what I think the enemy tries to do with us as men, especially. He'll say, this is your mistake, this is your failure, I'm going to take you out of this game. And so many men have gotten out of the game of life because they haven't learned how to get back up and get back in there and keep playing.
Absolutely, man. It's all about recovery. I learned that as a father. It's like I will make mistakes, and it's not about being perfect as a parent, but being present. And what I do, I make sure I always right my wrongs. And that's all Patrick Mahomes did. It was like, okay, that's an interception, but I'm not throwing another one today.
Right.
If
Yeah.
he threw another one, he says, I'm not going to throw another one. It's
Right.
about your mindset. And like in music, when you say someone ad libs you, if I say yes, they'll say yes, no, no. That's what Satan does. That's what our enemy does. He ad libs our failures. You failed. You messed up. You lost her. You're drunk again. You're looking at porn again. And so that's what we have to learn to cast away, or as David said, he weaned his soul like a mother weans a child from its breast. As men, we're very soulish, and we live from what's interesting. We say we're not, well, we fight to not be so emotional, but yet we're very emotional because if you look at statistics of how we behave in our high risk behaviors, we don't think a lot. What I mean? We're living from the feeling in that moment. I mean, how many intelligent men you hear about are now incarcerated?
Yeah.
And it's just that one mistake. And when we're not used to, again, processing in real time, like, okay, this decision I'm about to make, let me process what the end result would be right now. One analogy I always use, or an example, was the Avengers movie when Doctor Strange, when Thanos was coming to get the last stone, he had to analyze, I think, or contemplate 14 million, over 14 million outcomes.
Right.
And he chose the only one that they could win. At the time, it looked like it was a bad decision. It looked like he punked out, but it was the best decision. And as men, when we learn how to process in real time, like a computer,
Yeah.
we become more effective decision makers, and then mistakes won't be as prevalent, but also we won't fear making them because we've allowed ourselves to process not just the anger, but the fear, the anxiety, the trauma, the sadness, the depression. One of the things I've removed from my vocabulary, Andy, is telling boys to be fearless.
Yeah. Oh
That's it,
man.
it's impossible. Like
Right.
when you become a father and you see your child, it's like your heart is walking outside of your body. And there's a fear there. There is like, man, I'm be praying and I'm protecting because I don't want anything to happen to my beautiful daughter or son.
Yeah.
So for me, but if I was to say I'm supposed to be fearless, I'm supposed to not feel that ever. But if there is no fear, there is no courage.
Right.
There's no need to be courageous. And so I tell my boys and men, it's okay for us to feel fear. However, we should never succumb to it. And that's what the scriptures is talking about. Do not fear. The Most High, he understands that we will be scared. But when he says do not fear, he means do not let it make you dismayed or stop you from truly walking in his will. You think Moses and the other prophets weren't scared when they had to face seemingly insurmountable odds?
Right.
Yeah, they just moved through that fear.
Yeah.
They'll yell, or like in Hebrew is teruah, you will yell a battle cry and just run through it. But they felt fear. A warrior, I think Nelson Mandela, he has a great quote. He says, courage is not an absence of fear, but basically moving through it. And I'm paraphrasing. And,
Yeah.
and it's not an absence of fear,
Right.
and so I think
And I
it's
think
imperative we live from that. Yeah, go ahead.
absolutely. No, thank you. And I think the reason that there were tears that were almost like blood drops or tears of blood when Jesus was in the garden,
Hmm.
he was asking for courage because going to the cross was not going to be easy. And he knew that.
That's a very good. I'm glad you brought that up because he literally asked the Most High to take the cup from
The
him.
cup from him. Yeah.
Yeah, and he in that moment you saw his humanity.
Right on.
But when God didn't answer him, he says, "Let your will be done."
And he
And
stepped into the
yeah,
courage he needed. Yeah.
yeah. So he allowed himself to be human. Here it is, God allowing himself to be human in the moment to release the fear, to cry out, to release it, so that he can truly walk in why he was here. And that's a very good point you brought up. But Imagine if he would have suppressed it or repressed what he was feeling. Or a greater example is Barak and Deborah when he didn't want to go to war, and she said, "If I go, all the glory will come to me." He feared he had fear had overcome him in that moment, but he was wise enough to express that even to a woman. This is the first woman to go to war in Israel's history, mind you.
Right. Yeah.
And he was a bold warrior, but for some reason in that moment, he didn't have it. And because I believe of his transparency and his courage to be transparent, could you imagine following a leader in that moment who was scared? That could have cost many men their lives. And so there's a power in allowing yourself to feel fear, but then not succumbing to it, because him in that moment succumbing to it possibly could have been going to war, feeling scared and anxious and hesitant. But that hesitation could have cost Israel that victory. And
Right.
that's when he knew to call on Deborah to say, hey, I don't have it right now.
Right.
And even deeper, Andy, I'm glad we're talking about this in marriage. Our wives are called helpers. And when I looked up the word, and I talk about it in Battle Cry, the Hebrew is Azer, which not only means helper, but also a shield, a protection.
Hmm.
But as men, we feel that we're supposed to be in control of everything, that we don't even allow our woman to operate in their full giftedness and why they were created. And then you wonder why we're so burnt out or feel overwhelmed and overworked, because here it is, God says clearly in the beginning that we're not supposed to be alone, or it wasn't good. He gives us a helper and a protector, a shield, and we don't use her.
Right.
That's a major problem. And so again, that goes back to what I call misconstrued masculinity, which is a misunderstanding of what that word means. It's masculine is just an adjective. It's a description of attributes traditionally ascribed to men. But when we allowed ourselves to be limited to just there, we can't. It's impossible to do all things through Christ, bro, because we're limited. Christ exuded nurturing. He was a lover. His compassion and empathy towards women, him crying and weeping in the streets of Jerusalem openly, him
Right.
turning the table, making a whip out of cords and chasing the money changers out. He was a lion. So you
Right.
see this comprehensive nature of a man or God man, that we're supposed to be Christ-like. If we're Christ-like, we should be like him. In other words, we want to be the lion, but we also need to be the lamb. And that's crucial. We need to, again, a male lion doesn't go into protector mode until the pride has been penetrated with the threat. The
Right.
lion sleeps up to 18 to 21 hours a day. He's in lamb mode the majority of his day. However, when it's time to hunt or protect, he turns the lion on. For humans, that's fight or flight. Again, when you're stuck there, if your whole life, your daily life is lion mode, man, your adrenaline stays high. You can't rest. Your thoughts are constantly unsettled, and it's a miserable life that so many of us live as men, because we fear allowing the kink in the armor to show, man. And it's unfortunate, but that's what I feel God has called me to do, is to help men get liberated from that mindset.
Absolutely. So I'm curious, you did a Crucible weekend. I know you're a Crucible brother. What was it in your life that led you to doing a weekend? What was it about the Crucible weekend that led you to doing that?
Friend of mine, Marcus, who's also a Crucible brother, he had went through, and we were on the front porch of my friend Ron Lee's house, like three kids, literally sitting on the front porch talking. And I was just tired, Andy, and I knew my root cause of this mental fatigue was my father wound. The trauma that my father inflicted on me, not physical, but just verbal, and even with his absence. And I needed to do something. I reached the wall, and I'm like, look, I can't continue to live this way. He mentioned the Crucible, and I said, okay, I give it a try. And it was imperative for me that I really gave my all that weekend. And so Pastor Phil, who's a friend of mine as well, He was one of the men there greeting me. And when I walked in, he says, "Are you willing to give everything you got?" I say, "I'm going to do everything that I have." Because in my mind, Andy, is that if God don't heal me here, it'll never happen.
Right.
I was tired, man, just like the majority of brothers who go. And that's what drew me to the Crucible, was this fatigue and knowing there's more to life.
Yeah. I'm going to tell you, I found your book, Cry Like a Man. It was fascinating. I loved it. It is a great book. Folks, if you're listening to this, it is a book worth reading or listening to or picking up. And that's not just because Jason is here. I found myself drawn in to your story. Drawn into so many things that you shared, and it's impossible for us to cover all of it today. But there was some trauma in your world. Your father, his absence, not being there, times you wanted him. And there were some other traumas, a lynching in your history. Would you just explain? Because my belief is, when I was listening to that some of those things probably led to you being tired as well. Just this pain.
Well, yeah, I what's interesting, when I went to the Crucible, we had to pick one thing. Now, if I had to pick everything, I need a Crucible month, not a weekend. But yeah, going back to my grandfather's lynching, I believe it was 1936, that resulted in his family, which was my uncles and aunties and my grandmother, experiencing racial terror from the police in the city of Fort Pierce. That almost drove my great uncle insane. And then, they all moved. Well, I think only my mother moved up north, but from there was interesting. I found that they all developed dementia except two. And from there, when I started learning more about the brain and how God never designed it to hold trauma or stress or worry, hence why he tells us, do not worry, do not fear, so many times in the scriptures, I saw this unresolved trauma torment my family until they were gone almost.
Mm-hmm.
And subconsciously, I was too young to process what was happening. But when I got older, I realized I didn't want to live like my mom. I didn't want to have a couple of breakdowns. But to her defense, her first marriage was very abusive. I lost my brother Larry to murder, and then I lost my other brother Keith to murder as well. And so she had to endure a lot of pain when losing. Larry was my brother on my mother's side, but then my brother Keith was from my father. But my mother loved Keith as well.
Yeah.
And so she went through a lot, but she never could release it. And what was interesting, Andy, when I started taking care of her with dementia, she finally had freedom from that trauma when she was able to forget it.
Mm.
And so I'm like, and God was showing me in that moment, he was like, do you see what you must do? You must cast your cares unto me. You can't hold it. You can't do anything about it. And that's when he told me, you cannot allow your trauma to time travel. When you do that, it ruins the moment of every step you take, in the present. And so if I couple all that up, and then of course me growing up without my father actively in my life, it took a toll on me, Andy. And a husband who was demonstrable. When I come home, if things weren't in order, I'm yelling. And during a time when my daughter needed nurturing and love, I was still trying to rear her up as a middle schooler. That was ridiculous, but again, that's how I was raised. And eventually, man, I said, I'm going to stop intergenerational trauma with me.
Mm.
If trauma can be passed down, so can healing.
Yeah.
And the Crucible was the beginning of that journey. Yeah.
So, folks, today is part 1 of my interview with Jason Wilson. Stay tuned for part 2.
For more information about our weekends, please go to thecrucibleproject.org. Or if you're ready to get started on your transformational journey right now, you can connect with one of our Crucible certified coaches for a free 30-minute session at thecrucibleproject.org/coaching. That's thecrucibleproject.org/coaching. If you like what you heard, connect with us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Rate and review wherever you are listening, and don't forget to subscribe on your preferred podcast platform. Thank you for listening.